So, hi everyone, and welcome back to our podcast series, Storrer's Edge AI in Renewables. My name's Stuart Storrer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Storrer Growth Solutions, helping businesses grow with AI-driven business systems. Now, today, I'm delighted to welcome Jonathan Wood. Jonathan's the Chief Commercial Officer at Nova Pangaea Technologies, one of the UK's most innovative clean technologies company. Jonathan joined Nova Pangaea in 2024, bringing extensive C-suite experience in renewable fuels and energy, including a Harvard Business School background. He was recently honoured at the SAF Global Summit 2025 for his leadership in sustainable aviation fuel innovation. Nova Pangaea has developed RefNova, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, a groundbreaking patented technology that converts agricultural and forestry waste into sustainable aviation fuel and biochar. What makes this particularly exciting is their partnership with British Airways and LanzaJet on Project Speedbird, which will produce 102 million litres of sustainable aviation fuel annually. The project has secured £9 million in government funding and represents a major step forward in decarbonising the notoriously difficult aviation sector. Jonathan's role is crucial as the company transitions from their successful demonstration plant at Teesside to commercial scale operations. And I'm keen to explore both his personal journey in renewable energy and how Nova Pangaea is positioning itself to lead the sustainable aviation fuel revolution. So, welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us today. Great. Thank you very much. So, Jonathan, let's start with your personal journey. What drew you to the renewable energy sector initially? How did your path lead you to sustainable aviation fuel specifically?
Well, whilst I'm 100% sold and committed to the sustainability agenda and climate changes here for all of us to see, I came into renewable fuels, low carbon liquid fuels, or sustainable aviation fuel as we now call it, from a business point of view. I could see the market was going to move in this direction. I could see a business opportunity, but also a business threat, a business risk. And at that time, I was working for BP, the division of the global oil major, BP, responsible for supply and sale of aviation fuel. And I could just see this as a business imperative. So that's what got me into it originally. And it's just grown from there, working then subsequently for a company called Neste, a Finland-based company, which is very much orientated towards circular solutions and in fact the global leader in the supply of renewable fuels today, and now into a much smaller company trying to stand up a new technology to enable further scale up and growth of low carbon liquid fuels.
Terrific, thank you. So you were recently honoured at the SAF Global Summit 25 for leadership and innovation. What does that recognition mean to you personally? And what do you see as your key contributions to this industry?
Well, it was all a bit unexpected and unplanned, but for me, the most gratifying aspect is that it's come from colleagues in the industry. So it was a founder of Sky Energy who initiated it. I know him for approximately 10 years, and we're in this together, basically. There are many larger companies, but also many smaller companies who are all pulling in the same direction, developing solutions, and time will tell which are the ones that are really the most successful and which aren't. Some will undoubtedly fail, some will be successful, some will be acquired. That's all okay, and that's the normal trajectory of a new industry. But for me, the most gratifying aspect was the fact that it was coming from colleagues who were in this together.
Yeah, super. Well, congratulations. For our listeners who might not be familiar with Nova Pangaea, Could you explain, I guess in simple terms for us, what RefNova technology does and why that's revolutionary?
So you summarised very well at the beginning what we're trying to do. We've got a demonstration plant up in the northeast on Teesside, and we've got investment plans that will be progressing for our first project under the banner Project Speedbird in the UK. But what we basically do is take biomass waste that is not crop-based biomass, but whenever we produce crops, there's always a lot of waste that's left in the fields, or even, dare I say it, burnt. Forestry residues. Well, people might ask, what the devil is that? Well, out of the sawmills, a third to half of the wood is actually waste. And there is waste also when the timber is harvested for sawmills to make tables, chairs, and what have you, or going into the pulp sector. So there's a lot of waste material out there, and actually hundreds of millions of tons worth, especially when you go outside of, I'll say, developed economies into the global south. And we take that and we put it through a process we've developed and fine-tuned. Actually, the process originates from the Baltics, but was acquired by the company many years ago and has been fine-tuned on our demo plant, and we're doing further tests, and trials. But basically, it converts using a so-called pyrolysis process, converts after some pre-treatment these various biomass residue waste materials into sugars that can make ethanol, which can then be used both as an input into sustainable aviation fuel or other renewable fuels. It can even be put into road transport fuel, or used as a renewable feedstock for the chemicals industry, which I think there are many applications in the chemicals industry which could develop over the coming years. And we then have a co-product which is a charcoal-like biocarbon or biochar, which has many applications, but fundamentally can be deployed in the farm and horticulture sector to improve land quality, but also can be used as a non-fossil ingredient in construction materials like cement, can be used in asphalt, for road making, or other more high specification, high performance composite materials as a strengthening agent and the like. So numerous applications, but what it also enables is it's a form of carbon sequestration. So we put waste biomass into the process. We produce, on the one hand, sugars for ethanol, on the other hand, biochar, and the biochar is a form of carbon sequestration. So in effect, we have, one hears a lot about how we need to capture CO2 and bury it or reuse it. Well, this is another application, but rather than it being a purpose in its own right, it's actually a side benefit of the process of making a renewable, non-fossil fuel. And it's worth mentioning also, we talk about decarbonisation. What we're actually doing here is defossilizing. Rather than digging the carbon out of the ground and adding carbon to our ecosystem, we're recycling the carbon that's within our ecosystem. Because when the fuel is burnt as ethanol or a sustainable aviation fuel, it does emit carbon emissions. But the point is, it's a circular ecosystem as opposed to being dug out of the ground and adding to our ecosystem.
Yeah, fascinating. You just mentioned Project Speedbird there, Jonathan, which is an initiative you're working with British Airways, I think, and LanzaJet. Right. I guess that's your flagship commercial project. So how does that come together, and what sort of role does each partner play in that? Yeah, well, tell us a little bit more. It's a great showcase and example of the collaboration that we need to stand up effectively a new industry, a non-fossil oil-based fuel supply, production supply industry, using different raw materials
and different production processes and different supply chains. So, yeah, we're responsible for the front end as Nova Pangaea, sourcing the raw material and then converting it into the ethanol. LanzaJet will then convert that so-called second generation non-fossil, non-crop based bioethanol into sustainable aviation fuel. And with IAG, the mother company of British Airways, they will help then transport it to the major airports in the United Kingdom. They obviously they're the largest user of aviation fuel in the UK and have a fuel supply system with some of the established oil majors. So they're very experienced in taking it to market and obviously using it. And so they are effectively our customer, and LanzaJet is then playing that final step in the value chain, the role as a final step in the value chain to convert it into aviation fuel. And it meets all the process that we're deploying here is approved. It's gone through the approval process several years ago, which is very rigorous for all fuel production process types. That you have to get that approval of the aircraft and engine manufacturers. So it's all tried and tested from that point of view. Obviously, we need to produce it on spec every time, but the process is approved. So this project will deliver approximately 100 million litres worth of aviation fuel, but also renewable aviation fuel, but also the biochar, as I mentioned, and be carbon negative. And that's then the showcase that and the approach that we'd like to deploy in other regions of the world. So this has the opportunity of being not just good for the UK, but also an example of technology know-how that we can bring and to other parts of the world as UK PLC.
Fantastic. 100 million litres per year is obviously, it sounds like a substantial amount. Could you put that into perspective? How many flights could that fuel?
So we're at the start of the journey, but that's approximately, I can't off the top of my head tell you how many flights. It depends on whether it's long or short haul. But what I can say is that's approximately 1% of total aviation fuel demand in the UK. But you may be aware, your listeners may be aware, we've introduced from this year a so-called mandate obligation. So a certain proportion of all aviation fuel has to be renewable or non-fossil based, as from this year. Likewise, the EU has introduced from this year a similar a mandate obligation. And it's mirroring what's been in place for many years actually in the road transport sector, where all the fuel that we use today also has a non-fossil bio component to it. Of less than 10%, but it's gradually increasing, and so the same will apply in the aviation fuel sector. The proportion will gradually grow over time as we try and defossilize this so-called hard-to-abate sector. But so the target is to achieve 2% use of renewable, sustainable aviation fuel this year, and that's based off a certain, roughly similar emission reduction. So the idea is that renewable fuel reduces by close to 100% the emissions versus net emissions in the value chain versus fossil fuel. Now, because of the sequestration that I mentioned earlier that biochar enables, we're delivering actually twice, roughly speaking, the emission reduction, because we're locking away as part of the production process. So our project Speedbird will deliver. It's going to come on stream later this decade, but in effect, it's going to deliver approximately 2%, the equivalent of what the 2% mandate this year requires. So it's small, but it's one of many projects that are on the starting ramp in the UK and around the world. But our intent is obviously not just to deploy in the UK, but elsewhere in the world. So to have many, if you like, Speedbirds around the world.
Of course, fantastic. So as the Chief Commercial Officer, what is your primary focus? Is it scaling existing products like Speedbird or developing new partnerships and markets? What's your drive?
Exactly that. On the one hand, making sure that we've got all the inputs as well as the offtake agreements for the different products, not just the ethanol for the SAF, but all the other co-products, making sure that that works economically for all parties, and then engaging with potential partners around the deployment of our technology around the world. Yeah.
So, talking a little bit about, I guess, the industry itself, some of the challenges that you face and the future. What are the biggest challenges facing sustainable aviation fuel industry right now? And how is Nova Pangaea positioned to address those?
Well, I mean, the challenge that we've got in aviation, like in all sectors, is to move from fossil-based hydrocarbons to non-fossil renewable hydrocarbons. In the case of aviation, electrons don't look like they're going to be the solution. So electric battery propulsion doesn't look like it's really feasible for the given the energy density that it can convey. So liquid molecules are likely to be the solution for a while. So we've got to move from fossil-based liquid hydrocarbons to non-fossil. So huge growth opportunity. And we obviously want to have a solution that can be deployed within the existing supply chain infrastructure and the existing aircraft. So aircraft typically are used for 20 plus years, so twice the average age probably of a road transport vehicle. So we need a drop-in solution, a so-called drop-in solution is what we're looking for. And so we've now got a number of different technologies that are already being commercially deployed or being developed, like that with Nova Pangaea Technologies. So the challenge now is to scale these up and bring the cost down, because quite frankly, if the renewable sustainable aviation fuels cost the same as fossil jet fuel, then everybody would buy it tomorrow. The point is, not surprisingly, at the moment, they don't, because we're dealing with a new industry. We've been making fossil-based jet fuel for 100 years now, and we've refined it and optimized it. We've got very large feedstock supply points, these large wells that are dug and churn out hundreds of thousands of barrels. So, and compare that with aggregating a very fragmented biomass residue feedstock supply chain, and then developing and optimizing the technology. So we've got to go through those learning curves, scale up, bring the cost down, and the more we bring the cost of renewable sustainable aviation fuel in line with that of fossil jet fuel, so obviously demand will increase. But we also need to recognize that policies are key enabler here. Regulations that recognize the carbon cost of fossil fuels is key to getting a more, I'll say, true reflection of the real cost of those fuels, and I certainly expect over time that then renewable fuel applications, including in aviation, the price will converge, and it'll be both bringing costs down on the one hand and recognizing the true cost of fossil fuels through policy on the other hand. And policies can be either on the demand side, like I mentioned earlier, where in the UK and the EU now there's a gradually increasing requirement for a proportion of the fuel to be renewable, but also supply side incentives to help stimulate and scale up the new technologies and help bridge that cost gap. So the challenge is fundamentally the cost and navigating this pathway so that we bring the cost of renewables closer to that of fossil jet fuel and scale up. There are a lot of projects out there, but not so many have reached that so-called final investment decision. And the energy transition is not a cheap gig. Basically, you don't get anything for less than 100 million. It doesn't matter what currency you're talking about. And the larger plants are $1 billion plus. So this is a huge investment. Wow. But it's also, if we were looking at the fossil industry, retrofitting and maintaining the fossil refineries costs a huge amount as well. Cheap. So it's not all incremental, but it's also a huge opportunity in terms of economic growth and jobs. And in some cases, some of the technologies will be drawing upon more localized feedstocks. So, as we see the trend to more concern around not just sustainability, but supply security, this offers the opportunity for countries and economies that maybe didn't have or don't have a fossil fuel supply industry to potentially develop an industry. If I just take countries like, for example, India or Brazil, it's a huge growth opportunity for them, where they've got obviously huge forestry and agricultural sectors, and it's also an opportunity then to further develop the rural economy. So it's not just about fuel and energy and sustainability, and it's also and supply security. It's also got lots of side benefits.
So, beyond aviation fuel, what other applications do you see for is it RefNova
RefNova.
technology in the sort of broader renewable chemicals and fuel markets?
Right now, our focus is on those markets where there's regulatory support, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I mean, with our non-fossil based ethanol, that could ultimately go into multiple different applications as a chemicals feedstock, um, and and time will tell on that. And likewise, as I said, on the biochar front, I think there's lots of opportunities to develop that market and use it in construction materials and other high performance materials. So that's for me the market development opportunity in the next few years.
Okay. And are there any sort of policy changes or government support changes that would help accelerate the adoption of sustainable aviation fuels?
Well, certainly. I mentioned that on the demand side, so-called mandates to help increase or require the increasing use of renewable fuels. On the supply side, I think incentives. But I'm very conscious here. We can't be calling upon the taxpayer. Ultimately, this industry needs to stand on its own 2 feet, and we need to follow a polluter pays principle. So I see incentives like those we also see in the US, despite some of the negative commentary around some of the changes with the current administration under Donald Trump. We still have in the US also a number of incentives, but we need ultimately for the costs of this to be carried by the user at the end of the day. But and that's where well, I would also highlight it's not really driven by policy, but the voluntary market. So there are a number of corporations and companies who are trying to decarbonize their supply chains or fly in a lower carbon way. So you've also got here companies leading the way in terms of driving demand, perhaps more, because they understand more how they can help initiate this industry and start it up, whereas the private consumer is perhaps less well informed. But we need to really, that's a big job for us, is to help inform and raise awareness with the end consumer how they can also make a difference here, so that we ultimately all voluntarily choose to maximize the amount of renewable fuel we use in whatever we're doing, whether it's aviation, driving our cars, or otherwise.
Okay, thank you for that. So just coming around to, I guess, yourself and your current role, what's been your biggest learning personally since you joined Nova Pangaea? And how's that changed your perspective on clean technology commercialization?
Well, I guess as I've transitioned from large oil co to medium-sized emerging global player to now startup, the level of difficulty has gone up, the level of risk has gone up, the level of uncertainty has gone up, and you don't have the balance sheet and the buffers, if you like. If things that are going to plan, you have to be more agile, you have to be more willing to accept to change course. It's not as easy, it's not as comfortable, but on the other side of the coin, the decision lines are shorter, and you're more aware of the difference you can make. And the startups have a role to play in terms of bringing these new technologies to bear, and ultimately, as I said earlier, will grow or potentially get bought, and that's okay. The balance sheet is the key thing. Having the the funding to be able to make long-term decisions is so critical, especially in a sector like the energy world. And that's where smaller companies struggle. And so you spend a lot of time actually not developing your plans or implementing them, but actually securing the funding to enable you to execute these plans. So that's one of the key differences from in the startup world versus the large corporate world.
And what gives you the most optimism about the future of sustainable aviation fuels and the broader energy transition?
Well, despite all the bumps in the road, when you look at this from a macro point of view and the different perspectives, I think at the end of the day, it's clear that we have to move to non-fossil based energy forms. And so that's what gives me the most optimism, is that fundamentally people can see that, and society can see, and all stakeholders can see we need to move in this direction. The fact that the journey's difficult and we hit bumps in the road, well, that's just life. We've just got to navigate around those, and so long as the direction is clear, and that's where I think there's a high level of alignment and science supports the direction that we're heading, then we'll get there. And just recognize that you need to be flexible, agile, and resilient here. If you hit a bump in the road, find a way around it. And that alignment of stakeholders is be they politicians, be they players in the industry, suppliers, customers, is what gives me optimism that we'll get there. And the thing with targets is, at the end of the day, if you don't achieve it, but you achieve 80% of an ambitious target, then that's a win.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, Jonathan, if any of our viewers are interested in finding out more about what your company is doing or yourself personally, how could they do that? How could they sort of reach out?
Well, contact us on our website, novapangea.com, or contact me by email, j.wood@novapangea.com. Happy to discuss with anybody who's interested what we're doing and how we can make a difference, and because this will only ever happen if we work in partnership. We can't do it on our own.
Jonathan, it's been absolutely fascinating. What strikes me most about Nova Pangaea's story is how you've combined genuine technological innovation with practical commercial partnerships to create real world impact. The fact that Project Speedbird will soon produce over 100 million litres of sustainable aviation fuel annually, while simultaneously sequestering carbon through the biochar, is it called, production, just shows how clean technology can deliver both environmental and economic benefits. Thank you for sharing your insights on both the technical innovations behind RefNova and the commercial realities of building a sustainable aviation fuel business. So for our listeners who are interested in learning more, I will include links in the show notes so that they can reach out to you. Jonathan, thanks again for joining us on Storer's Edge. It's been absolutely an absolute pleasure to meet you, and thank you for your insights. Really appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.